Hey guys, Vicebump here, bringing us Unholy Death Knight, the War Within Beginner Rotation Guide. This video is for all you out there who's picking up the Unholy Death Knight in the War Within and want an easy, comprehensible guide that they can follow that doesn't take too long and doesn't go too in-depth. I will get you 90-95% way of there for all the different kinds of content, and I will cover every single aspect that you need to care about. So resources, core rotation, opener, debuffs, buffs, all those kind of things, so that you have a good grasp. I will simplify some things and that kind of thing, but it won't really matter in the big picture. Anyway, jumping in, let's talk about Unholy Death Knight resources. We have two main ones and one which is kind of a resources, but not really. We have the runes. Those are the green little skulls, you know, beneath your character portrait. They recharge on their own. When you spend one, it takes 10 seconds by default to fully recharge. That is decreased by haste. And you have a couple of abilities that also help to regenerate runes. Important thing to note is that you can only recharge 3 at a time. So if you spend all 6 of them, only 3 will recharge, and then the other 3. So maximum 3 can recharge at a time. These are spent on abilities like Skirt Strike, Clawing Shadows, Deafening Decay, Festering Strike, and it is quite probably the core resource that we have. Spending runes generate runic power at the rate of 10 runic power per rune spent. Runic power is kind of like our spender resource. We use that on things like Death Call and Epidemic. Can go up to 100, and that also feeds back into recharging runes. Because every time you spend runic power, you have a chance to actually increase your rune regeneration rate. Finally, we have this thing called Festering Wounds, which is not really a resource, but also kind of is. Our whole gameplay in single target mainly is to build Festering Wounds, which are debuff on our target, and then burst those back again. And that's going to be like the whole core rotation involving that specifically. Well, let's move into the core rotation now that we talk about the resources. We essentially have 3 spells, which we press like the majority of the time. We have Festering Strike, Skirt Strike / Clawing Shadows. Those kind of change when we change our talents, but they're essentially the same spell. And then we have Death Call. What we do is that we use Festering Strike to build Festering Wounds on the target. We use Skirt Strike / Clawing Shadows to burst those wounds. And then you use Death Call to spend any runic power we generate. Very simple and easy. However, there's a couple of questions we need to ask ourselves here. Like, how many wounds do we want on the target, and when should we prioritize Death Call over our Festering Strike and Skirt Strike? It's a good idea to kind of use Festering Strike when you hit 2 or 3 wounds. It goes up to 5 or 6 when you do that, and then you burst it down to 2 and 3 again. Just a simple rule, we don't really want to go too high on wounds, because that means if you use Festering Strike, we're going to overcap, essentially generating wounds that go beyond 6, which is the max number, and we don't want to go too low, because we have a couple of abilities that actually spend wounds and they are proc based. So if you're sitting at 0, it would be less efficient to use that. So 2 to 3 is a good number to go for. That is kind of what you need to care about. Like, you apply wounds, you burst them, you spend your runic power. Generally, always avoid overcapping runic power. So if you go too high, always make sure to use Death Call to go down again. Finally, for the core rotation, we have Soul Reaper. This is our execute ability. Whenever the boss reaches 35% health, you just want to prioritize this in your core rotation whenever it comes off. Ideally, do save a rune for this, so you don't end up in situations where you can't use Soul Reaper because you just spent the rune on Clawing Shadows / Skirt Strike, for instance. Now, we also have dots as Unholy, which we apply to our target, and the importance of these dots really vary depending on our talent build. If you're running a talent build where you don't actually like improve your dots at all, you can simply ignore them. We have a couple of spells like Dark Transformation. It will apply it when we spec into another talent called Unholy Assault, and you really don't need to do that manually. However, if you're going in a more disease-oriented build, which there are, you really want to keep this up. And you do that by pressing Outbreak. So Outbreak is also part of the core rotation, but only if you actually spec into our disease builds, because otherwise it is not worthwhile to press. Alright, moving on. We have Procs. and it's just a single one really. Sudden Doom. This comes from your auto attacks. There's like a built-in bad luck protection. So you auto attack, you get a proc, and then every time you auto attack and don't get a proc, you increase the probability. So it's kind of like nicely evened out. What it does is that it decreases the cost of using Epidemic or Death Call, like a Runic Power Spenders, by 10, and it significantly amps up the Runic Power Spender, so it makes it automatically crit, and it also interacts with a talent called Doom Bidding, which summons a little magus that fights for us. This means that the proc is really quite powerful. It also suggests Rotten Touch, which is another talent. There's like loads of things that goes into this, and our tier set as well. Essentially, if you get a Sudden Doom proc, you want to spend that immediately. That is simple as that. If you're running the talent that gives you 2 charges of this, it's not that important to spend it immediately, but it's still a good habit. As soon as you see the proc, just use it as soon as possible, because this is really, really high value. Right, onto buffs and debuffs, there are a couple for us that we need to juggle as the Unholy Death Knight, but there are a couple of things we can do to make it much easier to deal with these. Starting out, we have buffs. We have Icy Talents. This increases your attack speed, and it stacks up to 3 times, lasts for 10 seconds, and it stacks by using Runic Power. So essentially just Death Call. Really want to keep this up. If you drop it, you're going to have to stack it back up to 3, which is going to be a bad there. So keep track of it. And if you do end up in a scenario where it's just about to drop, just make sure to hit Death Call to keep it back up. We also have a Playbringer. This is kind of like a disease-oriented talent, which we sometimes run. When we hit Skirt Strike, it increases our dot rate of damage by 100% for 10 seconds. Again, just cap it, track it, and if it is about to go out, you're going to hit the Skirt Strike to refresh it. Furthermore, we have Death Rot, debuff on the enemy. You want to hit Death Coil to keep this up. Stacks up to 10 times, so if you do drop this, it's going to be quite bad for you. Just track it, and if it's about to run off, you want to hit Death Call. Finally, Rotten Touch goes off your Sudden Doom procs. Whenever you use Sudden Doom, it increases your damage of your Skirt Strike and Claw Shadows on the enemy for 10 seconds. You kind of don't need to play around this, because we end up having like really high uptime. But again, if it drops, you want to deprioritize, like, if you want to get fancy about it, if you don't have Rotten Touch, try to go high on Wound, otherwise you go low on it. But that's really a passive one, so you don't need to care about that too much. Anyway, that might seem overwhelming. However, in reality, these kind of keep themselves up on their own if you just weave your abilities properly. Weaving here is that you essentially don't press one ability too many times in a row. So, you want to hit one Festin Strike, and then one Death Call, and then one Skirt Strike kind of vibe, and not go like, oh no, Festin Strike, and then 5 Skirt Strikes in a row. Alright, that's a bad idea. So as long as you weave abilities, since the buffs and debuffs are kept up by different parts of your core rotation, they're gonna, nicely keep themselves up, as long as you don't just spam one ability at a time. That's like the easy way of handling them, and you don't really need to trap them if you don't want to be bothered. Alright, so that's kind of all that goes into the core aspect of Unholy. That's everything you do when you're not pressing cooldowns or doing AoE damage or anything like that. So that's kind of like what you need to track and keep in mind. Now let's take a look at openers. They're always good to have, because it's the way you start out every single boss fight, and it's quite nice to have a set order of abilities. Now it does matter actually which hero talents you pick for the opener. So we have one opener for Rider of the Apocalypse, and then we have one opener for Sanlayn. These are kind of like, just execute them. You can do the same thing every single time. If you have questions about the Sanlayn opener, like why does Unholy Assault come that late, the reason is that you get like a big damage increase from Sanlayn after like a long while. So once your Dark Transformation finishes, that's when you get a huge chunk of damage, and you want Unholy Assault to overlap that. That is why we have it so late. Anyway, just keep track of these. They're quite simple, so just execute them the same way every time. Now let's talk about cooldowns and how that works for Unholy Death Knight. We sit on a 45 seconds cooldown window, which means that every 45 seconds we're going to press a number of cooldowns. We have a couple ones that are 1.5 minutes or sometimes 3 minutes, but essentially everything just overlaps if you press them on cooldown, and it's every 45 seconds. Generally, on pool, we're going to use Race Sublimation or Army, if you don't spec into Race Sublimation. We're going to use our Unholy Assault, we're going to use our Dark Transformation, we're going to use Apocalypse, and we're going to use Abomination Limb. I'm going to note here, Abomination Limb is a 2-minute cooldown, but it kind of doesn't matter when you use it because it doesn't do much damage. So if you have any AoE coming through or any adds that need to regroup, just save it for that. It really doesn't matter if you bring that into the 45-second window. Anyway, after 45 seconds, you're going to use Dark Transformation and Apocalypse. 45 seconds afterwards, you're going to be Race Abomination, Unholy Assault, Dark Transformation, Apocalypse again, and then just that kind of keeps on going. So every 45 seconds, you're getting some burst damage, and you're going to get a nice damage spike. This is also where you want to use your trinkets. We really want to use 1.5 minute trinkets, so you want to use that on pool, and then again when you have Race Abomination and Unholy Assault coming up with Dark Transformation and Apocalypse. Really quite simple. I can just, summarize it as press your cooldowns when they come up. Quick note on Apocalypse, it can burst up to 4 wounds. You need to have at least 1 wound to use it, so do make sure to have that. But you don't need to have 4. It's best to have 4, but in a general scenario, it doesn't really matter. So just make sure you have at least 1, and then you can press that ability however you want. Now, let's talk about Sanlayn, because, in general, the core rotation is the same regardless of what kind of talents you have and that kind of thing. You need to keep up your dots a bit differently, your buffs, all that kind of thing, but not that much changes. However, if you pick Sanlayn, we have a real change to the rotation when we use Dark Transformation. So what happens during Dark Transformation is that Skirt Strike becomes a lot more valuable. Essentially, it scales off your current dot, which also is increased in duration by hitting Skirt Strike. So you spam Skirt Strike, you get a huge dot, which feeds back into doing lots of Skirt Strike damage. And then after Dark Transformation finishes, you get a huge chunk of damage by consuming that disease. Essentially, as Sanlayn, when you hit Dark Transformation, you only want to press 2 buttons. You want to press Skirt Strike if you can. Technically, if you have more than 1 rune, you press it. And if you can't do that, you want to press Death Call. So, Festering Strike, complete drop from the rotation. You ignore your Festering Wounds, all that kind of thing. Just focus on Skirt Strike and Death Call, and that's it. Right. Simple as that. Now, that's all single target based. Let's talk about how we deal with AoE and essentially Mythic Plus. In a raiding scenario, we're not going to run like a 2 AoE heavy build, which means that we're going to do 2 things to do cleave and AoE damage. One of them is you use Death and Decay. This costs 1 rune, you place it underneath you, and it makes your Skirt Strike, Throwing Shadows, cleave. So when you get add spawning, what you want to do is pop down Death and Decay and then just spam Skirt Strike to do AoE damage. Furthermore, we have Epidemic. This is our AoE rune power spender. You want to use this in raid, it really depends on your talents here, but around 3, 4, 5 targets, that's when it becomes better. As again, if you have improved Death Call, it ends up being 4 target. If you don't, it's 3. And there's loads of other things going into that, but that's the general recommendation. You just dot up all the adds, and then you use Epidemic to do nice AoE damage to them, essentially. That's what you're going to focus on in a raiding environment. If you're running a disease-focused build, it is worthwhile. If you have spread targets, use Outbreak to dot them all up. And then you can use Epidemic as well to do adds damage to every single one of them. But the most damage is just going to be dot them up and keep up your Playbringer to have your dots rolling very heavily. In Mythic Plus, it's a very different scenario because the whole way Unholy plays changes completely. This is the general Mythic Plus opener. I like to view it this way, that when you approach a pack, this is what you want to execute. It relies heavily on putting down Defile here to do AoE damage and allow your Skirt Strikes to cleave. It also relies heavily on building up lots of wounds in targets. That's we use Festering Strike and Holy Assault into Vile Contagion. That's going to spread wounds to everything. And then when we hit Skirt Strike and Death and Decay, it's going to burst them all and deal loads and loads of damage. Once you kind of got them through this opener, you've used up all the cooldowns, you kind of spread up all the wounds and you start burst them. What you want to do is you're going to hit Skirt Strike if there's at least 1 wound on a target. We run Bursting Source here, so there's big AoE damage. If that's not the case, you can use Epidemic, once your Defile Cleave buff runs out, it lasts 14 seconds after you pop it down, use another one and then keep going. Like after the opener, it's going to be putting down Defile when you need to, spam Scourge Strike and spam Epidemic. And that's going to be like the Unholy AoE Rotation. As I said, at the start, you're going to have lots of wounds, which means that Scourge Strike is going to be your most pressed button. But after a while, if the pack lives for a long time, you're going to end up running out of wounds. At this scenario, you're still not going to use Festing Strike. You're just going to move into prioritizing Epidemic a bit more. And then just running naked Scourge Strikes, even though there are no wounds on the targets, when you run out of Rune Power. That's how it works. There's a whole, there's loads more to it, but I think that's more suited for a Mythic Plus specific guide. Alright, so that's the War Within Unholy Death Knight beginner guide. Hopefully that was easy to understand and comprehensible and not too long. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought about this video. Upvote, downvote, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.